Hello everybody, Floppy Waffles 69 here, and welcome back to the channel. Today, guys, we will be continuing our Down the Line series featuring the Italian Battleships. And today, the Down the Line series brings us to the Tier 6 in this Italian BB line. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, the Tier 6 is a bit of a stinker. Compared to the Tier 5, which I very much loved and liked, and I think it's actually pretty damn good for its tier, we now take a step up to the Andrea Doria, which is more like taking 2 steps backwards, in my opinion. This ship just does not feel comfortable to play. Its sap is incredibly underwhelming, especially against, let's say, battleship targets. Its accuracy is not very good. Its consistency is not very good. Its gun firing angles are not very good. Its survivability is not very good. There's very few things to like about this ship, and I'll be honest with you, this is one of 2 stinkers in this line for me, at least. I know I'm jumping the gun there and kind of giving a little sneak peek about the line entirely, or in its entirety, but in my opinion, this is the very first one. This is definitely a step backwards or step in the wrong direction, and I do think if I'm looking at this ship, if I'm wargaming, I think that this ship could use a little bit of love. Much like I said with the American battleship line, especially these early to middle tiers, those battleships could use a lot of love. I think a lot of the tiers 4s through 7s are neglected in this game because really all we care about is top tier, and top tier is where everyone plays. So I think, you know, wargaming is not really concerned with the middle to lower tier, which is a bit of a shame, okay? Because sadly, newer players, what do they have to play and get through before they get to higher tiers? Ding, 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 correct. That is low to middle tiers. I know they announced a while back that they're going to potentially be looking at like a low tier rework, potentially with damage, consistency, upgrades, that kind of stuff. And I think that is long overdue and will be very, very good for the game. But enough about that stuff. Today we are all focused on the Andrea Doria, the Tier 6 Italian battleship, and what makes this thing tick. And I'll tell you what doesn't make this thing tick is anything to do in regards of consistency, damage dealing potential, tanking potential. This is very, like, all in all, a very underwhelming battleship, and I'm not a big fan of her. I think there are a boatload, no pun intended, a boatload of battleships that are just vastly superior to this particular ship. And this is one of the ships, in my opinion, that gives this line a bad rap. This line in its entirety too is not very user friendly to grind. Is the line worth the grind? Yes, absolutely. As you know, the Cristoforo Colombo is really dominating the meta up at tier 10. And obviously with the super ship being announced, I believe it was a year ago, the Affordante or something like that, which is in the works, kind of like in development hell right now. We haven't really seen that thing resurface or any dev blog corresponding to that. Same with like the Z57. I really don't know what their plans are with super ships as of yet, but we haven't really had a new one introduced or announced in quite a long time. But that again, this is kind of that investment standpoint. So if you are looking for like a potential line that also includes the super ship at the end of it, this is the line for you in that essence, right? You know, the Andrea Doria, in my opinion, in a nutshell, before I start looking at the hardcore statistics of this ship, I think should be played, and this is like my very first tip, with usually, remember how I said I think you should be shooting AP and SAP at lower tiers like 50-50, and then when you get to higher tiers, it's more like 70-30 or 80-20. I think the Andrea Doria is a little bit of an exception. I actually would be shooting armor piercing more like 70-30 or even 80-20 down here at tier 6. The guns and the SAP penetration and the targets you'll be facing, not to mention you could theoretically be put into tier 8 games. It just feels like a very underwhelming package, and it'll show. I mean, honestly, if we look at the server statistics, and again, I'm just looking at the NA server. I'm sure if we go across Europe and Asia, I'm sure we'll find, similar numbers, right? But the Andrea Doria is towards the bottom of the pack, only getting around a 48.7% win rate in the random queue, and then its average damage is only like 45,500. The low end obviously is New Mexico, but that could be a little bit, I don't want to say inflated, but deflated based upon how popular the New Mexico is. I think a lot of people go down the United States battleship line, especially towards the Iowa and the Montana, because of that historical aspect, just like the Yamato. And then who's topping the charts obviously is, premium ships like the Mitsu, the Repulse, and then our first tech line battleship on NA would be the Ismail. Again, I highly recommend the Soviet battleships as the first line you should be grinding as a battleship player, because it teaches the foundations of how to play battleships incredibly well. Not to mention the grind is very enjoyable. There's really no stinkers in that line. I made a whole video going over this and why I believe that is the case. I don't want to dive too much into that because I want to stay more on lines with the Andrea Doria. So now that we talked about the server statistics about the particular ship, how about we actually talk about the Andrea Doria itself? Of course, like we always do, we're going to start with the armor layout, okay? 26 millimeter nose, 26 millimeter ass. We are picking up this deck plating of, what is it? About 38, 44, and there's some like different little armor schemes there, like little kind of chipped portions, right? You also have another 26 here separate from the forehand deck. And then you have an upper belt about 120, and then your main Citadel belt will come in here at like a 220 millimeters. And then we look at the Citadel. It is well above waterline. It does kind of have these sloped armor, slopes or whatever, like sloped armor scheme for its Citadel protection there from its belt armor, but really don't pay too much mind to that because it's really not going to help prevent this thing from being Citadel. This is a battleship that can be Citadel, and as a matter of fact, I find this battleship being more Citadelable than the Tier 5. We're starting to progress. We're still in that Dreadnoughts phase. We're starting to progress out of it, and this is that first out of it battleship that we're going to come across, especially in the Italian BB line, and it really does show with its armor scheme. This is not a hard battleship to Citadel, in my opinion. With any larger caliber armor piercing, this thing will be fairly easy to Citadel. And again, it's not helping the fact with commanders that your gun firing angles are about 40 up front and in the rear facing forward, and then 40 in the back. Not very comfortable firing angles to use. You are showing a large amount of broadside to get all these turrets to bear, and that comes down to the superstructure and around how these turrets have to traverse around that. So again, if you're able to shoot all 4 turrets on a target in return, you can get punished. You have to tread with caution when you are playing this ship. Survivability, 45,000, again, with a torpedo belt reduction or damage reduction of 32%, which isn't terrible. Again, though, if we look at the armor layout, our torpedo bulges, as they are right here, do cover the vast majority of the ship from turret to turret. So it's a larger surface area, so if you are eating torpedoes at like a 30 to 45 degree and outward, you should be fine. Again, the big thing is if you're taking torpedoes in on the nose, there is no torpedo protection there, so if your nose isn't already saturated from damage saturation, you will be eating full torpedo damage there on the nose and ass. Going into the artillery, you're picking up 2x2 and 2x3 of the 320 millimeter main battery gun that is reloading in 30 seconds, has a 180 degree turn time of 30 seconds, and has that minimum shell type switching, time baked into the ship at 21 seconds, which is also very nice. Maximum range is 17.2 kilometers as well. But I do want to touch base on the main battery just a little bit. As you know, we are picking up 17.2 kilometer range, and this thing, even with that range, hitting anything reliably at that range is such a crapshoot, and you will see a plethora of examples in the gameplay I'm going to be showcasing you about just salvos. I don't know where they're going. There is no consistency. One shell landing on target while the rest scatter all around the ship. It is just so painful, guys. This ship is so painful to me that it's like, really needs some love in my opinion. We're going out all the way to 17 kilometers. Our sigma value is a measly 1.6. That, in my opinion, is below the average, the baseline average of a 1.7 sigma value, with a horizontal dispersion of 233 meters and a vertical dispersion of 139. Now, I understand I'm just throwing a lot of numbers at you, and you're like, well, Floppy, what the fuck does that mean compared to the grand scheme of other ships? Just take my word for it here on this one. Sigma value with the consistency of the shells landing in the center of the ellipse, that is not good. The lower the sigma value, the worse it is for the consistency. You want a higher sigma value. And then the horizontal dispersion is atrocious. That's the tendency of your shells to spread outward like a shotgun pattern, and then the vertical dispersion is north and south of their shell's tendency to travel north and south of that ellipse, basically, right? Just brutal, painful numbers, and it translates incredibly well to this ship's gunnery, and you will notice that right away when you play this thing. You will be, holy fuck, my shells are going nowhere where I want them to go, okay? You know, you only have what, 10? I believe it's 10 guns on this ship. Somewhere on the range of that, right? 10 or 12. I think, what is it? 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You have 10 guns on this ship that's already dropping below what you had at the Cavour. So less shells going down range, worse accuracy. It's just, you can already see what I'm starting to go with. This is a painful ship, guys. Painful, painful, painful. You know, touching base on the semi-armor piercing, 10,250 is nice with an armor penetration capability of 82 millimeters. Why is this important? You need to know a lot of like cruiser values, right? So 70 millimeters, you know, you can Citadel the Trento. If we go to other cruisers too, which I'm not going to do, their Citadel plating is less than that 82 millimeters. Looking at you, Omaha, stuff like that. You want to be shooting semi-armor piercing, in my opinion, at cruisers and destroyers. I think you are wasting your time by shooting semi-armor piercing at a lot of the battleships you're going to be going against tier for tier, just because their armor values, they're still in that dreadnought style, era, and their armor thickness is just so incredible. You're going to be getting nothing but shatters and measly amounts of penetration damage, so it's almost like you're wasting salvos. I would really stick with armor piercing against battleships, in my opinion. Going into the armor penetration, or more or less the armor piercing values, you're going at 9,700 with an 830 meter a second shell velocity coming out of the barrels. That's tying that of the semi-armor piercing. Pretty comfortable to use. It is a little floatier than the previous tier. Again, though, it really is like, it's not night and day. You're going to be noticing, like, fuck, I really have to lead the target now. You should be comfortable with these shell trajectories and where they're landing. Really should be comfortable, like I said. Really no problems here, guys, from my opinion. You have a secondary battery, a lot of them. Problem is, though, is you're starting to pick up these 90 millimeter secondaries. So you will do damage with your 135s, as you can penetrate 23 millimeters of effective armor. But these 90 millimeter secondaries only penetrate 15 millimeters of armor. Now, if we go to a corresponding DD, okay, that is no problem. They're coated in 16 millimeters of armor. Really no problem at all. But once we start getting into the higher tiers, these 90 millimeters really start to become irrelevant, and the only thing they can reliably do for you is start fires on targets to do damage. Because their pen is so incredibly low, it's not even enough to penetrate some destroyers' levels of armor, and God forbid, I mean, some superstructure is 13, so it can penetrate that, but again, that has to be pinpointing of not only hitting the ship, but hitting the superstructure alone. You start to see that these 90 millimeter secondaries are starting to become more lethargic. I know one thing I didn't mention about this line is that a lot of people wanted this line to have SAP secondaries. As you know, a lot of these BBs in this line have quite numerous amounts of secondaries on their ship, but they have only HE penetration, or only shoot high explosive, which translates to that 15 millimeters of effective penetration out of the 90 millimeter turrets. It's not comfortable. Again, you're only relying on fires at that point. So a lot of people wanted semi-armor piercing to compensate for those 90 millimeter guns so they could do more damage more reliably. And it also allowed the option that if you so choose wanted to spec into, secondaries, you theoretically could, right? I'm going to say this to get this and clear the water. I would not spec these ships for secondaries. I think it is a waste, mainly because you're coated in 90 millimeter secondaries, and I don't think the damage output is there. Now, if they were able to shoot semi-armor piercing, and you already know where I stand with semi-armor piercing secondaries, there could be a discussion about potentially speccing into the secondaries then, but they don't have them, so the discussion, in my opinion, will really end here. I don't think it's worth it, and I think it's a waste of not only the 4-point skill, but the 3-point skill as well, and you're already 7 points out of putting those towards anything else on the ship to increase the survivability or the speed when you're undetected or your consumables. Like to me, I can't really justify spending 7 points plus potentially also taking away the aiming systems mod in slot 3 for the secondary battery mod 3. To me, there is just absolutely no way in living hell I could do that, because I need that minus 7% dispersion to even make these ships remotely work, to even take them into battle. So I think the discussion, in my opinion, really stops there. AA defense, a horrendous and atrocious. CVs will eat you alive. That's all you need to know about this ship. There's really no point in talking about each individual AA module, like, oh, maybe here, maybe there. I mean, not to mention, it only has the maximum range. Where is it? Maximum range of 4.6, which is only basically self-defense AA. There's no team AA at all, period, dot. And it's horrendous anyways. You got to stick with your allies. You are not the lone Italian BB that can take on the enemy team. It's just not going to happen. And that translates all the way up to top tier. You really cannot do that. Moving into the maneuverability of the ship, your top speed is 28.4 knots, but let me double check because I might have the signal flags. I knew it. Okay, 27 knots with 640 meter turning circle radius and a rudder shift time of 13 seconds. As you can tell from my upgrades, I don't spec anything into the rudder shift or anything like that. I'm going into all damage mitigation because I still think this is where you want to be playing this ship. It's still comfortable to use. It doesn't feel sluggish. I can still turn, and I can anticipate those turns and dodge torps, unless I'm caught completely with my pants down and the destroyer catches me off guard, I should be fine. Really no problems here with the maneuverability. And then the concealment value, as I'm going to send my commander to reserve real quick. Base, you are picking up 13.4, and then with the commander on top of that, you will pick up the 12.1. In my opinion, you don't have to take concealment. You can work with 13.4 if you are a top tier battleship. The problem is, if you get put into tier 8 games, you're going to need that extra detectability or concealment values on this ship. And 13.4 to 12.1, that's a big range, and especially with, potentially getting overmatched out the yazoo, you need to have and take concealment on your Andrea Doria to even make this thing remotely work, right? All right, so that is the port analysis version. Let's go ahead and look at the upgrades real quick. I already talked about them enough, but I'll just go ahead and flash them up here on screen for you. Main armaments mod 1 in the first slot. Damage control systems mod 1 in the second. Aiming systems mod 1 in the third. That is a mandatory upgrade. You must slot this. There is nothing that comes close that you could slot that can make the ship any better than this. This is like the best upgrade for your Andrea Doria. You have to take this upgrade. And then in the fourth slot, I go ahead and take damage control systems modification 2. Though I could understand taking steering gear so you could swivel out, shoot all of your turrets to swivel back potentially a little bit quicker, so you're not, less likely of you getting punished by new battleships. To me, though, I think more scenarios you're going to want the damage control systems modification 2, because it's going to help alleviate those flooding and fires to some degree and help you, help those tick less and increase your overall survivability. So yeah, guys, that is the Andrea Doria package in a nutshell here in the port. Let's go ahead and check out some world-class gameplay in our Andrea Doria here, folks. Now, obviously, when I say world-class, I'm being facetious because that's just not how I feel about this ship. I don't feel this ship is very good, and I don't believe this ship is world-class. I actually believe 2/3, if not more, of the battleships at its tier are actually vastly superior in most every way possible than the Andrea Doria. The Andrea Doria, and along with the entire line of Italian BBs, in my opinion, give up a lot for their semi-armor piercing. The semi-armor piercing, in my opinion, is this shell type that is very easy to utilize, but the problem is making sure that they land. So the gunnery on this thing, it can't physically be consistent from a balance standpoint, because if it is, it completely outshines the other two ammunition types entirely. And because you just flat out get penetrations. You either get penetrations or you shatter. There is no anything else about the shell. And not to mention, the higher the tiers you go, you just do flat out more damage than armor piercing and citadel damage anyways or whatever. So again, it's just probably the like the most consistent shell type, other than high explosive. And there's a good example of the amazing accuracy that you have on the Doria, by the way. But it's probably the most consistent ammunition type for damage dealer. But the overall consistent ammunition type entirely in its entirety is high explosive, because even when you're not doing a lot of damage with the shell in general, you're still getting chances of setting fires, knocking out modules, that kind of stuff. So that still will probably take the cake. Okay, but yeah, so the sigma value being 1.6, the lack of consistency, there is no accuracy at all involved. It's a crapshoot. You're really rolling the die, and almost with a loaded die that can never roll a 6, because you are basically proc to roll a 1 or 2 almost routinely in this ship, and then just entirely, basically almost all these sap shell slingers. Basically every time. At least that's what I found. The only difference and the only exception to this rule would be the Colombo, because of the legendary mod, and because you go from 10 then to 12 guns, and then you pick up 16. I mean, how the fuck can you miss when you're slinging 16 shells down range? Like, that's kind of my thing. I've always said this, and I'm going to say it again. Probably sound like a broken record, but more shells, larger shell count, more chances of your shells landing where you want them to land, probably more consistent, more accurate, usually, in my opinion. Yes, I know there's ships like the Georgia and Shirokishima, and they actually theoretically have better dispersion. But again, 16 shells, 6. I mean, come on. To me, it's like, is it really like a competition here? You're really going to be splitting hairs over this? Whatever. Anywho, going back to just the Andrea Doria, you're seeing that a couple the sap shells or sap salvos that I fired at battleships got a lot of shatters, like on this Rio de Janeiro. So I just switched to armor piercing, and I actually did more damage. It's one of those things that I've noticed. It must just be the dreadnought style era of ships with the insanely high armor values and whatnot, and lack of superstructure. You're really not going to be doing too much damage. You'd be way better off just loading and locking the armor piercing. I think it's going to translate to just more flat out pen damage and just more consistent damage than sap. I really don't think you're going to see a change in semi armor piercing until you get to the next tier at tier 7, because I believe that's the first battleship in the line that you pick up 381 millimeter guns, 380 millimeter guns, one of the two. Don't remember, but I know it's one of the two. Which again, that is going to give you better minimum millimeters of penetration, which is going to translate to just easier amounts of damage. Yes, you go down to 8 shells up at tier 7, but again, you have a larger caliber and you have 25 millimeter overmatch with your armor piercing. So again, it's just a big upgrade in my opinion. The Andrea Doria, really not a big upgrade. The guns, I mean, being only 320 millimeter guns, and I can't believe I'm saying that, only 320 millimeter guns, just really don't feel comfortable on this platform. That mixed with the 10 shells going down range, that mixed with its accuracy and gunnery and consistency, and that also on top of the whole with the horrendous gun firing angles on this ship, in my opinion, it just really doesn't create a good, fun, practical package for a lot of captains to play. Matter of fact, I'm not surprised by the values that I see on the server from a win rate standpoint. Not that saying win rate matters when it comes to individual standpoints. That's going to be a personal opinion. I'm not going to say yay or nay to that. I don't want to be part of that conversation. But I will say when it comes to an overall win rate from a cumulative server value of a ship, I think that is a good statistic to gauge whether or not the ship is popular, right? See how many people have played, how many battles it's played in the last month, right? I think is a good, and then weighing that against how much on average it's winning. Okay, I know at lower tiers a lot of these statistics will be skewed because usually you don't have as strong of players playing this tier, right? They're usually newer players still learning the game. A lot of them don't understand the mechanics out of the game, like overmatch and penetration values and stuff like that, and stealth firing and how to utilize the smoke firing penalties and all that stuff, right? There's a bunch of stuff. There's a big steep learning curve. But I think if you fast or free XP your way past these ships, even if the ship is as trash as the Andrea Doria, you're doing yourself a disservice, especially if you're trying to learn the game and get better as an Italian BB commander or just a BB commander in general. The battleship play style, it used to be all about target selection, patience, and making sure you pinpoint specific parts of the ship, waiting for the right angle to present itself, all these things, which are still applicable. But it's starting to be eroded away with, you know, F keys and gimmicks and overmatch out the wazoo, and it's like it just turned into now a point and click sort of thing. Now, the reason I bring this up is because the Andrea Doria is not a point and click battleship. Okay, yes, if you're shooting an Omaha with semi-armor piercing, you are a point and click battleship. Most cruisers, if not all cruisers, with your semi-armor piercing, you are a point-and-click battleship. But battleships are by far the most popular class of ship played in the game. So take my advice, you're not going to want to stick with semi-armor piercing on the Andrea Doria for the entirety of the game. You physically cannot do that, because I don't think it's going to translate to a consistent, battle performance if you do that. Essentially is what I'm trying to say. I think that you will find a lot of your salvos being wasted. I think when you expect you see this massive broadside and you only penetrate 2 out of the 4 shells that land out of your 10 you fired on target, and you're only doing like 4K, like you're like, well, that is almost a wasted salvo. And yeah, pretty much is. You have to understand the values in this game and your penetration capabilities. And what is it? What did I say? 86 or something like that this ship has. You have to know, like 82 millimeters of effective SAP penetration. You have to know ships that are exceeding that threshold, and you have to know ships whose citadels and parts of their ship aren't exceeding that threshold. So the more you know, kind of thing, you need to have that information at your disposal. And sometimes it just takes going into the port screen, going down tech trees tier for tier, and looking at them. You know, the more common ships you're going to see. I can assure you, you're going to see a lot of New Mexicos. You're going to see a lot of what's another popular tier 6, the Dunkirk, ships like that. Those you're going to see quite a bit of ships. Another one would be the Fuso. Getting familiar with their armor values is only going to help you and translate to you being more effective on the battlefield, especially with semi-armor piercing. And that goes for all the tiers. And knowing the armor values and where they are and the plating that these certain ships have is going to translate to a more effective play style or gameplay out of you. Okay, that's like the big thing I can stress with this ship. Positioning about this ship, pretty similar to the Cavour. I think sitting around anywhere between the 12 to not quite exceeding 14 kilometers is the sweet spot of the ship. If you're forced into tight end scenarios like this, understand that because of your turret arrangement, your weakened armor scheme, your raised citadel, I don't really think you're the best brawler, okay? Also because a lot of battleships, battlecruisers have torpedoes nowadays. You do not have that. You don't even have a fuel exhaust smoke to theoretically disengage with, so you have to play like a standard battleship, and know what ships I can citadel, where to shoot specific ships, and how to utilize island coverage to your advantage to mitigate the amount of ships that can shoot your ship. Obviously this was a sweet moment because this guy's been spamming HE at me all freaking game, so trying to find this guy's broadside, I very much enjoyed this. Nothing's more infuriating than HE spammers. I can attest to that one. But again, do I have any room to complain? At this tier, theoretically, yes, I do, because my semi-armor piercing is kind of dog water. Up at upper tiers from the Lepanto, especially the Cristoforo Colombo, not really. I mean, I think you're part of the problem at that point, let's be honest. Everyone knows that. No one likes getting chunked for 20k 1000 damage with semi-armor piercing, even if they're at a steep angle, because they're pinpointing specific parts of your ships, or can just flat out overmatch particular parts of your vessel, right? No one likes that at all. We find ourselves in a brawling-like situation. We are just using our front 2 turrets. Don't even consider utilizing your rear 2, because again, you're exposing your citadel to being citadeled. Like you can't do it. You have to play smart. Try to angle your armor to the best of your abilities. The whole shape of this ship isn't very in your favor. It does seem to eat a lot of citadels. Like it's definitely not Kremen ellipse shape at all. And the plating is pretty damn weak, like I already showed in the port screen. So again, just angling your armor, trying to find that sweet spot based upon the gun caliber and the enemy you're fighting is going to be crucial. Okay? Going into my final thoughts about the ship. This ship is not good. Okay? Can you have good games in her? Sure. Every ship has the capability, based upon the commander and the right situation that presents itself, to have a good game. I'm just saying, of all the games that I've played in the Andrea Doria, this is just not a very fun platform to play the game. I find it more of a struggle to play this ship than it should be, and where it falls within the spectrum of battleships at tier 6, I think it falls towards the weaker end of BBs, in my opinion. Okay, you're still gonna have to outthink your opponents. You're gonna have to outmaneuver them and outplay them. This ship's gonna take a lot of brains to really work. Yes, if there's a cruiser that presents its broadside, you can shoot semi-armor piercing, but in all, I would highly recommend you stick with armor piercing on the ship, especially when targeting enemy battleships. Anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Stay tuned for more, and I will follow up in the next couple days with another one. Have a good one, and peace out.